Hello, this is Pastor Rick, and I want to welcome you to the Sunday Forum for this Sunday, March the 15th. We have a topic of some gravity here. We're going to talk about war. War, what is it good for? And we're lifting up this theme because of all the wars that are happening around the world, and not just other places, wars that we're involved with too as American citizens. Now, when I was in college, I remember the song by Edwin Starr, War, huh, what is it good for? We used to sing that. It was sort of an anti-war protest song. That's where we were as young people in college, many of us anyway, during the Vietnam War. But there's been an evolving sense of war, and when is it necessary? When is it evil? When might it be good? And so we want to stand back and study three different classic approaches to war that Christians have taken. And that's our interest here. It's not just to understand war as patriots, but war as disciples of Jesus. And classically, there have been three approaches that Christians have taken to war over the last 2,000 years. And they are pacifism, just war theory, and holy wars. And we want to review each one so that we can discuss on Sunday, how are we seeing, how are we evaluating, how is our approach to the wars we're involved in today? Do these theories, do these ideas that Christians have used for centuries, are they still valid? Do they help us today as American citizens? So let's start with the first, remembering that these ideas, Christian ideas toward war, have evolved over the years. But the first one was right there at the beginning, and that was pacifism. And here the core idea is that followers of Christ should not participate in violence or in war, period. This was prominent in the early church, where if you were a soldier, many times you couldn't be a Christian, or if you'd been a soldier, you might have to be rebaptized afterwards. Here, they reject participation in military combat. It encourages nonviolent resistance and peacemaking, and always emphasizes reconciliation and forgiveness. And this was not only in the early church, some of the early theologians of the church, Tertullian, Origen, they all said the same thing, that being involved with the military meant you had to take oaths to the state, which they felt was in conflict with Jesus. And this idea has always been true today in the peace churches, the Quakers, the Mennonites. Of course, Martin Luther King Jr. lifted up nonviolent resistance, as well as Tolstoy. So this is an idea flowing out of Jesus' own words on the Sermon on the Mount, and Christians always have to wrestle with this form of God's call to be peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers. But after Constantine became the emperor and converted to Christianity, Christians, following some of the Roman philosophers, came up with just war theory. And here, the core idea of just war theory is that war is tragic, it's caused by sin, but morally justified under strict moral conditions. In other words, war is bad, but not always the worst option. And so here, following some of the Roman philosophers, but then we have some early theologians, Augustine and also Aquinas, they come up with rules for the road, so to speak, on how to conduct a just war. Here are some of those, and they have two categories: justice before the war and justice during the war. Before the war, it has to be a just cause. In other words, there has to be some moral defense for being the aggressor. You have to have a legitimate authority, right intentions. War has to be the last resort, knowing that it is then a necessary evil. It's evil, but a necessary evil. A reasonable chance of success and proportionality. That needs to be in place before the war, and then during the war, you want to protect civilians, use proportional force, and avoid unnecessary suffering. And you'll see that many churches today lift up this approach to doing war. Catholic, the Orthodox, and many Protestant traditions, both mainline and evangelical. And that's why Often before a war, we want to hear from our congressmen, we want to hear from our president, even sometimes from our generals about what is the moral justification and what are the limits that they're placing then on any military engagement. Okay, those are the first two: pacifism, stay away from violence and activity of war. A second is just war. It's a necessary evil under moral argument and under moral limitations. And the third are holy wars. And here over the generations, some have felt that God was calling them to conquer land, to promote God's purposes. So here the core idea is war may be waged as a sacred duty in defense or an expansion of the faith. Now, historically, we think of the Crusades, right? In the 10th, 11th, 12th century, that we're going to conquer Jerusalem. And all those go back, of course, to Old Testament texts where the children of Israel conquer the promised land. They go back, of course, to the Bible. They go back to Judges, 1 Samuel. And they say, here, God has called us to do what we're doing. So the Crusades are one example. One might also see it as God's call to take over the United States, the promised land. Those who came from Europe felt that call, that this was the new promised land that they were to conquer. And today, certainly, Russia, in its approach to Ukraine, has this sense of holy war, since Kiev is the center of the Russian Orthodox faith. And maybe even at times Netanyahu in his approach to Gaza, that God has given us this land, we're taking it back. All right, so here we have these three approaches, and denominations, well, they differ in their approaches to, again, they got peace churches, Quakers and the Mennonites who lean toward pacifism. We have most of Orthodoxy, Catholic, and mainline evangelicals who have some just war theory. And we got some non-denominations who lean toward the holy wars because they sense that God is calling us as a nation, as a people, to conquer certain lands, to promote God's purposes. All right, so these are the classic three. Now, how does that fit today as we look at the Israel-Gaza war, or Russia-Ukraine, or maybe we look at Eastern Congo or the Sudan, what we did in Afghanistan, Pakistan and Afghanistan, Venezuela, now Israel and the U.S. in Iran? Do these three approaches help us frame our understanding of what we're doing and how to follow Jesus as his disciples? That's what we want to talk about in the Sunday Forum. So come prepared to talk, prepared to discuss and discern war. What is it good for, especially as a disciple of Jesus? Thanks for joining us for this Sunday Forum. Bye-bye now.